Does your church struggle to move people beyond the Sunday service? If so, you are not alone. It's one of the most common problems facing churches and church leaders today, and I hate it. That's why I developed a proven communications playbook that will completely change the way you communicate so that you move from just being a great preacher to being a great leader. And so the impact of your church moves from just being great on Sunday to every day. Imagine everyday impact for your church. That's what you'll find. So stick around and I'm going to walk you through what that means. So most churches today struggle to move people beyond the Sunday service. Even if you can get people to attend on a Sunday service, if you can get people to come in or to come back Sunday after Sunday, we know that most people aren't coming every week, right? They come a couple of times a month, or maybe they come once a month. And so it's difficult enough to try to get them to come back each Sunday, let alone how do you get people to move beyond that Sunday service? Because if you've been in church ministry for any amount of time, like me, you know that it takes more than a great Sunday service to produce real and lasting change that matters in people's everyday lives. Now, a Sunday service can help, right? It can be a moment. It can be a moment where they experience God's presence or they learn something new. But the real experience of the life of God that we want people to have is a 24/7 thing. It's only something that happens outside of the Sunday service. So how can we get people to move beyond the Sunday service? It's an incredible challenge. And like I said, most churches are facing it today. We want to get people to connect, right? We want them to get into a group. We want them to find a place to serve. We want them to invite other people that they know. We want them to talk about their faith. We want them to say, hey, I'm going to this great church and here's how it's made a difference in my life. Not just it's got a great service on Sunday morning, but here's how it's changed the way I live. And of course, we want people to give, and not just because the church needs money and we want to get something from them, but because, and I know you've heard this before, but we want something for them. And when people give, when they make that discipleship move to start giving, it's because something has shifted in their trust, in their faith, in their belief in God, their Father, their Creator, their Sustainer, that He's providing for them. And so those are the moves, some of the moves that we want people to make. And all those things are about getting people to move beyond just attending on Sunday. And this is like I said, a problem that's facing most churches today. And I hate that. And there are lots of reasons, right, that we struggle with this problem. We live in a consumer culture here in the United States. All the marketing messages that are coming at people all day long, every day, remind us that our identity in the United States culture, our identity starts and ends for many of us as a consumer. We are a consumer, and it's about what are we going to consume. It's about working hard so that we have money to consume the things that the culture is telling us that we need. So we live in a consumer culture. So when people come to church, their default identity, their first way of understanding and experiencing church is as a consumer. They're there to listen. I had a conversation, I remember years ago, where I was talking with a committed member of the church where I was serving as a worship leader. And I said, we need people to get involved. That, the Sunday service isn't just something that like we put on as a show. That's why we call it a service, because we want people to serve and to be a part of it. And he said, I always thought service was like service, like you are serving me like this is this wonderful service, like a meal, like you're a waiter. And I'm like, right, that's the problem. Right? That we live in this consumer culture. But there's a shift that's also happened here recently, just in like the last 10 or 15 years, that I think many pastors, many worship leaders, many church leaders have not really come to grips with. And that's that we live in a content saturated culture. If what people are getting from you and what people are getting from the church is primarily content, is primarily a message, or is primarily worship music, is primarily they're consuming the content that you produce on Sunday or that you cut up into clips that they get during the week, or content even that you take that message and you turn it into questions that your small groups, and it's all about content. If you're in the content game, you are competing in a game that you will never win, because there is so much content in the world today. And there's a lot better content, no offense, than the content that you and I can create. We're talking about people who, like the people in your church, can access the best content from the best preachers and the best worship leaders in the world instantly on their phone. So how in the world are you going to compete with that kind of content? So getting people to move beyond Sunday is not about being better at content. It's not about better Sunday services. It's not even about better announcements, right? Because a lot of times this whole idea of moving people beyond Sunday and getting people engaged beyond the Sunday service becomes, I've been and still am a director of communications. I'm the director of communications in 3 different local churches right now, outsourced. I serve churches, some churches in Texas, church in Louisiana, and this task of moving people beyond Sunday, many times people think of that, pastors, church leaders think of that as purely a communication issue. And in some ways, it is. But we don't solve that communication issue with better announcements or with video testimonials or with the latest digital tools. It's not that simple. It's not that easy. It's about fundamentally changing the way you communicate. It's not just what you communicate, it's the way that you communicate. And so in my experience, I've told you some of the experience that I had. I was a worship leader for many years. I've been a director of communication in a lot of different churches. I've consulted with churches all over the United States. I've worked with denominations. And here's what I've learned. I've learned that moving people beyond Sunday comes down to, I've put it into a framework that I call the Church Communications Playbook. All right. So I've developed the Church Communications Playbook that will change the way you, as a local church leader, as a local church pastor, the way you communicate. It's based on 5 things: strategy, consistency in what you do, what you teach, and what you celebrate. And I'll dive into those here in a little bit, but it's about your strategy. What's your strategy for moving people beyond Sunday? What are you trying to move them into? Is it a group? Is it serving? Is it giving? Is it a class? What is that process? So you got to define what that process is, that strategy that you're trying to move people into. You can call it a discipleship pathway. I know that's what a lot of people are calling it these days. You can talk about what that discipleship journey looks like within your church, but it's how you're engaging people beyond just attending that 1 hour a week Sunday service and engaging them in these other environments where they're training, where they're learning, not just learning the knowledge, but actually being trained about how to practice it, how to do it. So what's that strategy? And then it's about consistency. It's about using the power of repetition. It's about saying the same thing over and over and over in wonderful and creative ways, but saying the same thing over and over and over and over, because if you will repeat it, they will remember it. So it's strategy, consistency, and then it's in what you do, what you teach, and what you celebrate. So what you do, that's about your church calendar. That's about what makes it on the calendar and what doesn't make it on the calendar. It's about how those things are arranged on the calendar. It's also about the what you do piece. This will blow your mind. The what you do piece is also about your Sunday service, of what you communicate simply by what gets included in your order of service, where those things are placed in your order of service, how much time they get, what happens and what the experience is. When's the last time you sat back and really thought about why do we do what we do, and what are we communicating to people by arranging the service this way, and what are we maybe unintentionally communicating is the most important or the least important? Think about that one for a while. Anyway, we can get into that later. But so strategy, consistency in what you do, what you teach, and what you celebrate. So yes, what you teach. This is about what you preach on Sunday. If you're not willing to teach it, they're not going to do it. If you're not willing to take time to preach on the importance of groups and relationships and following Jesus together, and yet you want people to join a small group, if you're not willing to preach about the importance of giving, if you're not willing to preach about why inviting is important, if you're not willing to preach about baptism, why should people take time out of their life if you won't give those topics consistent, over and over attention? If those are the most important things, and I've actually identified 9 of them, by the way, those 9 things that should be on a rotation on your annual preaching calendar. By the way, you can preach those 9 things in somewhere between, the most I would do is 27 weeks. So that's only half the weeks out of any year. But what if I said, change what you preach half the year, and it will completely change everything about your church culture. People will move beyond Sunday. You'll never struggle with volunteers again. You'll never say we can't get people into small groups in our church. They don't do that in our culture. You'll never say we can't get people to get baptized in our church. You'll never struggle with those things again. You might be willing to do that. So strategy, consistency in what you do, what you teach, and what you celebrate. This is about installing systems and repeatable processes with your staff, with your leaders, for paying attention to and gathering stories. Stories, and how you communicate those. Yeah, you're going to communicate them on Sunday morning, but you're going to communicate them. You're going to communicate them everywhere. You're going to share them with your small group leaders and say, share this story in your next group meeting. You're going to share them with your leaders. You're going to share it with people who serve, the volunteers. So strategy, consistency is what you do, what you teach, what you celebrate. When all 5 of those things are aligned and working together, people will move beyond Sunday. You're out of the content game. You invite people out of consumer culture because you're saying, we want you to move beyond Sunday. This isn't just about being a consumer and getting you to come back again next Sunday for another great moment. That's not what it means to be a part of the church. That's not what it means to follow Jesus. I know that, you know that. But are we maybe inadvertently communicating that by the way we do what we do? So that our announcements can't overcome the fact that our services are structured in a certain way. Our announcements can't overcome, our email newsletter can't overcome, our social media can't overcome that what we're communicating to people is, it's really just all about content. And we're just going to get you this content. We're going to get you this message that I preached. And that's what's going to really change your life. When really those things have to be an entry point, and then we have to intentionally, consistently, I don't think that's a word, by the way, but repeatedly, we have to consistently move people through the content that we share into practicing, into following, into grouping, into serving, right? Into sharing their faith, into living it out. And that comes not just through a great message, not just through a single service, or maybe, yep, you say you do sermon series, fine, but not through a single serving Sunday service that gives them a great moment, but then it fades. We want to invite people into a movement, not to experience a moment. That moment is here and then it's gone. We need to bring them into a movement that is about following Jesus. And so that's what the Church Communications Playbook is designed to help you do, to change the way you communicate. Strategy, consistency in what you do, teach, and celebrate. So when you move people beyond Sunday, you Move beyond being just a great preacher. And I'm assuming you're a great preacher. You preach the Bible. You're like, what's different about our church? We preach the Bible here. Guess what? I've worked with probably over 100 church leaders now in my 25 years of being a consultant and working with churches. Every pastor I've worked with says what's different about us is we preach the word here. We're faithful to the Bible. So I'm assuming that you are a great preacher. But this church communications playbook, when you implement that with those 5 things, strategy, consistency, and what you do, teach and celebrate, you move beyond being a great preacher and you become a great leader. Listen, pastors are trained to preach. That's not a bad thing. It's a great thing, but it's the majority of your training. You're learning the languages. You need to understand what the Bible says, what the Word of God says, and how to then rightly explain and powerfully announce the truth that's in Scripture. I'm not saying you don't need that, you do. But that alone won't make people move beyond Sunday. Most of the time, it's not even bringing them back the next Sunday or every Sunday. Okay, so it takes more than a great message on Sunday to produce real, effective, lasting change in people's lives. And if you want to shut me off right now, shut me off right now. That's fine. You're going to be stuck just preaching message after message and saying, why aren't people serving? Why aren't people getting into groups as much as I want them to? Because a great preacher alone will not do it. You need to move beyond being a great preacher. That'll still be a part of who you are, but you'll become a great leader who's not just trained to preach, but who's trained to lead people into this movement. Right, with that communications playbook, it's going to change the way you communicate. So you're no longer just a great preacher, you're a great leader. You move beyond creating moments on Sunday to inviting people into a movement beyond Sunday. So that's 2 moves I've talked about, right? I don't know if you've noticed this. We're all about 3s and 5s. I'm trying to speak your language, pastors. We're all about 3s and 5s. So there's 3 moves. When people move beyond Sunday, you move from being a great preacher to being a great leader. And the third move is the biggest one, and it's the most important one, and it's the one that I know. Every church leader I know and that I've ever worked with, this is ultimately what they want. They want to move their church's impact beyond Sunday and into every day. That's what you want. That's what all church leaders want. Is you don't want that when like you stand before God that what he says is you preached great sermons. You want God to look at you and say you led a great church that produced positive change for the good news. That it changed people's lives, individuals, their relationships, families, communities, that you had an impact that was not just bound to this 1 hour on Sunday morning, but it spreads and it resonates into every day. So when you get people to move beyond Sunday, you move from being just a great preacher to being a great leader, and your church's impact moves beyond Sunday and into every day. That's what every pastor I know wants. And that's when the local church is at its best, right? Now you're not in the content game, you're in the movement game. You're moving people as they're following Jesus and experiencing the life that he designed and created them to live every day. I've mentioned this a little bit, but I've worked for over 25 years in the local church. I've held just about every position that you can have on church staff, except for senior pastor or lead pastor and women's ministry director. I've never been a women's ministry director. I've been a worship leader, youth pastor, family pastor, kids ministry director, communications director. I'm currently the communications director at 3 different churches, and I've even been the church janitor. That's right. And I use those skills to this day. The Church Communications Playbook is what has come out of the experience And it's that I've gained over that 25 years, and I've seen it work. I've seen pieces. I'll say this: I've not yet seen one church that does all of it, but I've seen churches that are doing pieces of it, and I've said all of that needs to come together into one church communications playbook. It's about strategy delivered consistently in what you do, what you teach, and what you celebrate. When you do that, I promise you, it will work. It works. I've seen it work. I've seen all of these different elements and these pieces work over time in churches, like I said, in churches all over the country, all different denominations, all different types of communities, all different types of people. These strategies work. I've seen them work. I know they're currently working in the churches that I serve. When you have a clear strategy and you communicate it consistently in what you do, what you teach, what you celebrate, you move beyond this whole idea of next big thing promotions, single serve Sunday experiences that's all about creating these great moments. You move beyond that into leading a movement that has an impact beyond Sunday, and into it resonates and it ripples into the everyday lives of people in your church and in the community that you serve. All right, so there are two ways that you can get started, that you can really dive into the nuts and bolts and what does this mean, that Church Communications Playbook. So there's two ways to get started. There's a free toolkit that I've developed. It's called the Essential Church Communications Toolkit, that you can go to sc3partners.com/toolkit and download it for free. You can get started right away. It's a very detailed document, 30, 40 pages long, lots of detail, lots of practical suggestions, lots of practical things that I've seen work and be effective over and over and over. And that toolkit is going to help you. It's based on the principles of the Church Communications Playbook. And you don't even have to implement all of those tools. You don't have to implement all of those things that are in there. Start with a few, start with one or two, and really start to implement those and gain some momentum. See how effective it is. And over time, you'll say, all right, let's implement another tool. Let's implement another tool. So that's one way that you can get started, is you can get that free toolkit at sc3partners.com/toolkit, or you can get a customized Church Communications Playbook specifically designed for your church for just $949 at sc3partners.com/playbook. Now, for less than $1,000 and 2 phone calls with me, what you get is the first phone call, I'm listening. 90 minutes, I'm asking question after question after question after question about your specific church, your specific environment, your specific strategy for moving people beyond Sunday. And what you get back in the delivery phone call, then I put together your customized Church Communications Playbook that tells you play by play, step by step, this is what you need to do to really codify that strategy, to communicate it consistently in what you do, what you teach, and what you celebrate. I'm going to tell you exactly how to do all of that. And then we'll have another 90-minute phone call. So 2 90-minute phone calls. We'll have another 90-minute phone call where I'll walk through, here's the playbook, I'll answer your questions, I'll talk about implementation, and it'll forever change the way you think about church communications, the way you think about how you move people beyond Sunday, how you invite people into that life of following Jesus every day, and not just keeping that bound up in that 1-hour Sunday experience. Because listen, here's the reason I'm doing this. You shouldn't have to struggle to move people beyond Sunday. You shouldn't. You shouldn't have to struggle with that. This is a system of doing church. This is what I believe. There is a system of doing church that has grown out of, unfortunately, this consumer culture that we live in, and this content obsessed culture. And that is what keeps people. It actually works against what we really want to do, which is move people beyond Sunday. So you shouldn't have to struggle to move people beyond Sunday. And with the Church Communications Playbook from SC3 Partners, you won't. I'm telling you, you won't have to struggle with it. I want you to move your church's impact beyond Sunday and into every day.